For the artists, for the passionate. Welcome to the Adventures Elsewhere podcast. Alright, hello everyone and welcome back to the Adventures Elsewhere podcast. Or welcome if it's your first time. I am your host, Jade Black, and today I'm doing something a little different. I want to talk about my backlog of projects and what I've done to transform it into something I can actually manage. I've talked about the backlog on the podcast, I think once before in a really old episode by now. So some things have changed since then, and I talked back then about I really want to go back to those projects and how I felt about them. And this sort of follow-up, I guess, episode is about what I've done to find a way that I can actually pursue the projects in my backlog that I want to pursue in a way that's not counterproductive, in terms of it doesn't take away from all of the stuff I have deadlines for in the same way that it would. So I guess firstly let's talk about what's in the backlog, and this is like the serious contenders of the backlog, because that is different now. So number one is actually my first ever big writing project, which is called Bloodsport, and this is a serial killer thriller. It's, as I said, it was my first. It was not great. It was originally sort of novella length, and then I made it a lot worse in edits, trying to extend it, and I think if I went back to something closer to the first draft or the 1.1 draft, there's something I could really do with this. I still have a lot of fondness for this project. Maybe someday we'll find out, rightly or wrongly. This is pretty low on the backlog list as of the minute, but that is subject to change at pretty much any point, to be honest. Next up is Jewel of Syria, and this is, I don't really quite know what to call this, to be honest. It's some sort of, like, fantasy, adventure, mythology, something or other. I really don't know how to give you a genre for this one. And this is one I did sort of try to do more than once and was just never happy with how it turned out. I'm still not really sure exactly how I'd handle this one, because it's a very odd project and it has a lot of different sort of bits to it, but this one is like probably the bottom of the backlog, just because I think it would be really difficult to pull off without a really solid idea of what I want to do with it. And I'm not going to have a really solid idea of what to do with it without a lot of thinking, and there are other projects I'd like to do that with first, much as anything. But I do think this is a project that has lingered on the fringes of my mind for a while at this point, so I think there is a good chance that something will be done with it. The name will almost definitely change though, because I don't really like it that much anymore. Next up is one that actually doesn't really have a title but beyond the main character's placeholder name. So that's Laura, and this is a supernatural thriller stroke horror. And it's set in the Edinburgh Vaults, which I highly recommend looking up if you've never heard of, by the way. They're really quite interesting. And this is one I got like 3k into and then just abandoned straight up because there was other stuff eating my brain. And I've never really gone back to it, but again, the ideas lingered. This one is actually pretty high on the list in many regards, because I think this is something I could actually pull off now. At the time, I didn't think I'd pull it off. Now I think I could, and I think I've actually got a pretty solid idea of what I want out of this, and really I'm just looking for the right time at this point to go with this one. And the same goes for the next one, which is Candidate 66. And this is probably the one I talked about in the most detail last time I talked about my backlog, because I love this idea. I love this concept, and that's distinctly weird because it's a fantasy. Sort of, I don't know if I call it epic fantasy. I'm not very good on fantasy genres, I'll admit, but like high fantasy question mark? Not really sure. Very sort of classic in a way feeling fantasy. And this is an idea I love. I actually got a decent ways into this one before, I don't know which other project I was working on at the time. I want to say it was Black Executioner, and I was like, excuse me, pay more attention to me. So I did. But this is one I really do want to go back to. This is, number one pretty much on my list. This is super, super high because I just love the concept so much. I had a lot of fun with it. And again, I'm really just looking for the right time stroke excuse to do something with it at this point. And you'll notice if you're looking at the video accompaniment, this one project is slightly offset from the rest. And this one is Charcoal Rain. And the reason this one's offset is because this is the one I've actually experimented with this idea on. So Charcoal Rain is a 1920s prohibition noir, and it started out as an AU and sort of took over into something else. And this, again, I got about 10k into this, and then I got stuck, and Hanzo wanted my attention, so I gave it to Hanzo. And this is one that lingered for a long time. And I felt like the problem with this one was I'd gotten too close to the ending of it too quickly. So I felt I missed a huge chunk in the middle. And I'm going to come back to that point later, because I want to talk about why this is a backlog, given that a lot of these ideas I'm actually really keen on and I've thought about a lot. And honestly, the main reason you've probably picked up on me saying this a fair bit is the determined ones and my other compendia just getting in the way. Nowadays, especially because I have deadlines for those, so it feels different, but that's always meant more to me for, a lot of reasons at this point. There are a lot of reasons that means as much to me as it does, and how much time and headspace it takes up as well. Because writing a novel is one thing, writing a compendia of intertwined standalones is another. Keeping track of it all is a lot, and then trying to skip between that and another setting is, for something that's novel length, I just couldn't quite manage it, to be honest. There was also a big element of lack of interest with a lot of these. I mean, there are plenty more projects here. So Oath of Honor is one I talked about last time that I really just don't see myself going back to because I'm not interested. And with some of these, so Jewel of Syria is the obvious one where I'm like, am I really interested in it? Well, there are some bits of it I think are really cool that I could run with, but the overall project, what it originally was, no, I'm not really interested in that anymore. And a lot of these I actually find quite difficult to know, A, what to do with, as I've talked about, but also to execute as well. So Jewel of Syria, again, classic example. I'm not great with fantasy, because I've never put that much time into it, and I'm particularly bad with adventure and travel and journeying, because again, I've not really put the proper time into it. Which makes it not only a project I'm sort of wavering on an interest with, it also makes it incredibly difficult. That one in particular I'm sticking with just because I think there are some cool sequences in it that I'd like to do as much as anything. And I also want to talk about where this backlog comes from, because it is incredibly diverse. You've got fantasy adventure, classic high epic fantasy, I don't know what to call it, serial killer thrillers, psychological, supernatural, horror thriller. And a lot of this is about experimenting and trying to find my way as a writer, find what I liked writing in particular, and also just having too many ideas as well. Like, I really struggled to keep a lid on that in the early days, and that's something I've had to work at quite a lot, is sort of keeping a lid on all that stuff. But finding my way and finding what I liked writing was a big part of it. So, Oath of Honor, classic example, that was one that didn't work. I tried to sort of write this weird steampunk fantasy, but not psychological, political bullshit. I don't know what, again, this is, but I didn't enjoy it. I certainly didn't like really any of the characters in it. They were, so it just didn't work for me. Whereas Bloodsport is the obvious one where I was writing that and thought, yeah, this is more what I want to do. And Laura as well, I felt like I really enjoyed that one. Candidate 66 was a bit of an outlier because I thought it was fantasy, I don't really give a shit, but it was so much fun. So let's talk about why I abandoned some of these projects, because I abandoned a lot of these really early. Sort of in my serious writing journey, I abandoned a lot of these really, really early. Especially with something like Laura that I got 3k into and then just never did anything with. Like, that's really short for a novel length project to just abandon it. And with a lot of these, with the ones that I've gone further with, a lot of them are just a mess. So like Bloodsport, I know I ruined in edit. Like, I don't think the original was great, but editing ruined it. It did, I can tell you that now. And there are a couple of other finished drafts I have that I really don't think I'm ever going to go back to because they just need so much work. They are just such a mess. And also genre with some of them. So Oath of Honor, again, in particular, because it's sort of steampunk, fantasy, adventure. I mean, those are three genres I don't do, like, at all. So it's just incredibly difficult, and unless it's an absolutely stellar thing I had lots of fun with, the chance I'm going to go back to that is basically nil, and it's not a stellar thing that I had lots of fun with. There's the odd exception to that, but that is a big reason for a lot of it is, well, I enjoyed writing this serial killer thriller and this psychological this, so why am I writing fantasy when, maybe I enjoy it, but just not as much. Why am I wasting my time with that? So I stopped wasting my time with that. There was also a point where, because this was also the point where I was still mainlining flash fiction, short stories, I wanted to get into doing subcalls. And at the time, there were a lot of subcalls. I mean, there probably still are, to be honest. I haven't had anywhere near as good an eye on that. There are a couple I've gone in for, but I haven't really searched them out. I was spending a lot more time doing that back then. The thing is, you really can very easily dedicate your entire writing time to subcalls. It's very, very easy to do that. And for a while that is what I did, and nothing came of it because I wasn't skilled enough, and I sort of knew that. It was more just a CPD practice type thing, and I'm actually really glad I did it, even though I'm still like, wow, I submitted that. But it was a really good learning experience and a really good exercise for me, and I actually would like to do more of that now, to be honest. But that took over my life and took away from a lot of those projects, some of which I sort of went back to, most of which I didn't because I didn't enjoy them enough or knew they were a mess or because of the genre. And it was also that sort of time when the compendium started coming about because I started to get a bit disillusioned and a bit bored of subcalls. And I wanted to go back to long form, and then the compendium happened, and the rest is history, as they say. But I think a really big reason why I abandoned a lot of these projects and never went back. It's sheer lack of story. And I hinted at this with Charcoal Rain in the sense of I thought I'd hit the ending way too early. That was a big problem because I was like, there's this huge chunk in the middle I've missed, and I have no idea what to fill it with. And that was a problem with Jewel of Syria as well, was I ended up being in Syria way, way, way sooner than I thought. I was like, I wasn't aiming to get to Syria until like the 50k mark, and I got there at like 15-20, and I was like, I don't know what to do about that, because the story says I need to go this way, but that means this will happen sooner, and there's just a distinct lack of story. Something's not happened right here. And that was also the problem with Bloodsport, and why I actually think the first draft is probably better than the edited version, because the first version was just what it was. It wasn't trying to be extended to any particular length. So then when I went back and edited it and thought, no, but this is supposed to be novel length, that's what I was trying to write, and extended it, there wasn't really enough story to do that with. But I sort of did it anyway, and it ruined it. And I look back on these, I was looking back on these, like, this was literally something that happened a couple of weeks ago. I started seriously rethinking about all this. And I thought, well, a lot of these are good stories, actually. A lot of these stories are something that's interesting, that's fun. Especially Candidate 66 and Charcoal Rain, I thought they were particularly interesting and particularly good. And I still like to experiment and still like to write in a lot of different genres. I mean, the Determined Ones covers 7 different thriller subgenres, and other compendia will expand more on that. There'll be more subgenres, more just different genres, and more variety. And I also look back on it and I think a lot of the issues I had, particularly with stuff like Bloodsport, was because of a lack of experience. And since then I've gained, years of experience. I mean, Bloodsport, how many years is it? Like, I don't know, it's like the best part of 10 years. So, I've grown a lot since then, and all of these things I thought were really difficult, or I don't know how to do, or lack of story, I can use the experience I've gained to help that. I mean, particularly when it comes to action sequences, I've had to get good at that. Thanks to, editing Black Executioner and editing, combat sequences, but also writing a military thriller. You get good at it because you have to. I'm way better at that than I used to be. And also, genuinely, I've said it before, earlier, and I'll say it again, a lot of these projects were fun, and I think it would be fun to go back. So the solution I've come to with all of this in terms of actually, when push comes to shove, I really would like to go back to these and do something with them, but I can't do a novel. But I'll be a bit sad if I never did anything with them. Let's do novelettes. Like, straight up, let's just make them shorter pieces. So novelettes, I mean, the definition of this varies quite a lot depending on who you ask, but I heard from a very reputable source I'm not willing to argue with, that this is generally between 10 and 25k pieces. A lot of these, I mean, Charcoal Rain is a great example. I was 10k in and closer to the ending than I want to be. Well, that's fine, just have the ending be where it is now. See what length it comes out as. It will be novelette length. If it needs changing, we can, add a few things here and there. There'll be gaps. It's a first draft. There always are. And, then it's fine. You don't need to extend it by like 40k or anything dumb like that. And with others as well, it's like lack of story, or I don't know which bit to do. Well, how about I do just the bit I want to do then? Maybe the bit of build before that that's necessary, and then the falling action afterwards that's sort of necessary to tie together, or not, if people just die at the end. Spoilers. Don't worry about it. But it seemed actually like a really elegant solution. Well, you got a lack of story problem, we'll just write a shorter story then. And I think that was genuinely a flaw in concepting a lot of these because I come from flash fiction, as in I rarely wrote anything above 800 words. Flash fiction. I didn't realise quite how much story was needed for a good novel. You know, and that's not just about, oh, but big plot things happen. I mean, just character arcs and all sorts. I didn't know. I genuinely didn't know. And I thought, well, this is too long to be any kind of flash fiction or short story that I can see the end of, you know, straight away. So therefore it must be a novel. And no, that's just not true. It's not. And then I thought about novellas or this or that, and I thought, well, how do we place these? If we do novelettes, then that's the whole foundation of the Shadow Spark anthologies. They're all novelettes. I mean, the themes are pretty flexible, generally. It's generally like a one-word theme, so you can interpret them a lot of different ways. They're deliberately designed that way. So with the backlog I have, in theory, I should have something that fits all of them. And I really enjoyed doing the SSP anthology, you know, that's just gone in, it's published in June, because I have my piece Count the Stars in there. It was the first time I've written anything of that length, and having written something of that length and knowing how much story is in that, a lot of these old projects that I concepted to be something much bigger than they were actually make a lot more sense at that length. I think especially Laura will make a lot more sense as a shorter piece. Candidate 66, I don't know. I think that is maybe a bit big, but there's a whole chunk of the beginning I could cut out, and you know, it's an entirely different process because it's not any of this, you know, true story stuff. I mean, it is just what it is. So there's a lot more you can do with that. I like novelettes. I really enjoyed writing and editing Count the Stars. I had a great time with it. It's a nice length of short and sweet, but also long enough to really get your teeth into and really care about. And reading other stories in the anthology, I really had that as well. So these are short, one-sitting reads, but there's a lot there and it's a lot of fun. I've really missed doing shorts. I have. I've genuinely missed doing that. So making an opportunity for myself to do that with a novelette that sort of like, it's sort of like the long shorts I always wished I could write, because a lot of subcalls are for, you know, 3k, 3 to 5k words, and I would only ever write stuff that was like 800 to 1.3, and that was really annoying, and I always wanted to write longer shorts, and I'm sort of learning how to do that in a way, because I do want to get back to subcalls, and this is sort of the stepping stone to that. So it's a great learning experience. It's a great way of tackling the backlog. I mean, it's a lot of birds with one stone. And I'm really excited. I've actually finished a draft of Charcoal Rain now. There is a finished draft of that. It's had some very light edits, and I'm going to be getting into proper edits soon, and you're going to want to keep an eye out for it. But in the meantime, if you are looking to read a novelette or 12, and you want a good example and a preview to the determined ones, the Cozy-ish anthology is out now, so there'll be a link in the description to that so you can read Count the Stars. But the depth of talent in the Cozy-ish anthology is insane. It really is. So I highly recommend you check that out and you read that. If you're looking for me, that's about all I have for this episode. If you're looking for me elsewhere, my social links are on the screen right now. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, and Pinterest. Twitter's the writing place. That's probably where you want to be most if you enjoyed this episode. Pinterest, we got exclusive art and world building. Instagram, I'm not really sure what I'm doing on there at the minute. We're experimenting. It's fun. If you're published or on the way, please get in touch. I'd love to be part of your journey. Indie and Self Pub, you're the people I want to hear from. My email's on the screen. There's a list of things I want to know in your initial contact. So please read that first. It makes everything easier for everybody. And until next time, you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a like. It helps the channel a lot. Intro and outro music by me. Copyright JBlack 2024.